Hey, Admiral, let's go ahead and just leave the bad old days of Iraq in 2003 behind us and instead talk about the bad old days of 2015. We've got enough to talk about now.
I think they're related, aren't they?
So Al-Qaeda, of course they are. Al-Qaeda and terrorism was declared beaten by the president in 2012 when he was running for president. 2013, I think he talked about the JV team. Then he talked about, you know, you can put a Kobe Bryant jersey on a JV team. There's still a JV team. Last year he said we don't have a strategy yet on ISIS. And then in 15 he said yesterday in Europe we don't have a complete strategy yet. When are we going to get a strategy against ISIS?
Well, actually, Joe, we do have a strategy. The president was referring yesterday to a specific plan to improve the training and equipping of Iraqi security forces, and the Pentagon is working on that plan right now. But absolutely, we have a strategy. Look, diving back into my old days.
What is it?
Diving back in my old days at the Pentagon, you say a strategy has three things: ends, ways, and means. The ends are very clear. We've said this all along. The goal is to degrade and defeat ISIL, to remove them as a threat in the region and around the world. The ways we're going to do that are through obviously airstrikes, but we have to train and equip Iraqi security forces. This is their fight on the ground. We have to stem the flow of foreign fighters. More than 30 countries are now taking legal and administrative action to try to do that. And of course we have to work with Prime Minister Abadi as he continues to build a coalition government that is more inclusive and more representative of all Iraqis, because in the end, and we've talked about this before, Joe, the real goal here is good governance in Iraq and good governance in Syria to remove the conditions by which a group like this can fester. Now, the means are, of course, financial, they're military, they're economic. We're putting pressure on ISIL economically as well. So there is a strategy, there's ends, ways, and means, and we're working at that.
Mike Barnacle.
Admiral, when you were across the river in your uniform, and today in your nice suit and tie, you continue to explain, you know, sorties above Iraq and sorties above Syria. Yeah. So I would ask you, do you think bombing is a strategy, or is it just another tool of war?
It is, as I described just a little bit. It's a great question, by the way. It's a way that you achieve a strategy. It's one facet of a strategy. This strategy is multiple lines of effort. It's not just military. And the other thing that we've been saying is that airstrikes alone are never going to be enough to defeat this group. We said that from day one. So yes, we've conducted thousands of them. And we know that we've taken thousands and thousands of them off the battlefield, as well as some of their equipment. They still have the ability to recruit. They still have the ability to retain and forces and to move them into the fight. That's what we have to get at, and you can't just do that through air power alone.
Admiral, it's Catty Kay here. The Defense Secretary is still saying we have the perfect strategy, just as you've suggested there. But at some point, the execution of the strategy becomes so difficult, let's even call it perhaps impossible, that you have to start rethinking what your strategy is, doesn't it? Are we near that point now? I mean, barring 20,000 American forces being sent into Iraq, retaking Mosul looks very difficult, holding the country together looks very difficult. At what point do you start to say, this strategy is flawed?
Well, Catty, any good strategy is constantly reevaluated. And I can tell you, again, going back to my former life and certainly here at the State Department, I've seen it firsthand. Every day we take a look at the strategy in its execution. We believe the strategy is sound, but in its execution, we look at it every single day, and we make adjustments as we need to on the ground. One of the things that the President, the Commander-in-Chief, was referring to yesterday was this element of the strategy about training and equipping competent Iraqi security forces. And obviously, we believe, certainly after Ramadi, that there is perhaps some room for improvement there. It doesn't mean the idea changes. We still believe you got to get those guys competent on the battlefield, more competent. But maybe the way we're going about that needs to be changed a little bit, and that's what the President was referring to.
Bob, is the United States, with respect to the Admiral and to the President and to the White House, is the United States deluded to think that there can be a representative coalition government in Iraq and that there can be a strong enough Iraqi army to defeat ISIS?
I mean, clearly there are problems with that, but I think we need to step back a little bit and say what's going on here. This was a war started by President Bush in 2003 with a very aggressive posture. We now have a new president and have had Obama as president for a long time, and there's a different theory of the case. And let's face it, Obama does not like war. He has an approach, I guess I would call it kind of that the United States should be the humble superpower, that we're not going to send masses of troops in, we're not going to have a trigger. If you think about that, that's wise in many ways, but the problem here is the Islamic State is a giant problem, and we are using a little bombing and few troops, and to achieve the defeat, to destroy this group, as the president says, is the strategy, is going to take something different or something more.
Bob, have you spoken? You obviously speak to so many people in Washington. You're wired. We certainly speak to a lot of people too. I've yet to speak to any foreign policy analyst on or off the air that says that this president right now has a coherent, workable strategy against ISIS.
Well, John Kirby's making a point that, I mean, there is a strategy. The question is, can it do the job?
An effective strategy.
Yeah. And
have you heard people say?
No. I mean, it's look, when you adopt the mantle of the humble superpower, as we have, and there may be a lot of wisdom in that, you're not going to go around and defeat movements like the Islamic State. It just can't be done with this level of force. I mean, maybe you can be lucky some days, but anyone you talk to, any military person, anybody who has thought this through, you just can't get there. And I think that, I mean, Joe, I think you're making a good point. Do you do nothing, or do you go all in, as some people are advocating? Clearly, we're not going to go all in, but is there some middle ground? Is there some way to adjust that? I don't see those discussions taking place.
And finding the middle ground, I think, is always the challenge. I mean, John Kirby, do you agree? What would the middle ground be?
I think describe it as the middle ground, but the way forward is it's got to be a coalition effort. It has to be international, and it has to be more than just military. I would like to just take a little issue, and I give great respect for Bob, obviously, but I think, first of all, I don't think you want your commander-in-chief to like war. I mean, war is a serious business that a nation has to undertake, and it's deadly, and it's lethal, and it's messy. The other thing I'd say is this is going to take some time. Yes, could you go all big? Absolutely. But then, as Caddy rightly said a few minutes ago, then you own it. And I don't think that's in anybody's interest, certainly not our interest, not in the region's interest. This has to be owned by the Iraqis. And yes, a representative, inclusive government is new territory for them. There's no question about that. But Prime Minister Abadi is making the right decisions. He's moving in the right direction. We're committed to try to help him in that regard. Because, as I said, good governance is the real way to get at this problem long term. The last thing I'd say is, even if we were just talking about this from a military perspective, and I know we're not, but let's say we were, it's still going to take 3 to 5 years. It's going to take a while. This is not something that's going to be solved overnight, and I think all of us need to have a little bit of strategic patience here as we work our way through it.
Bob Woodward, thank you so much for being with us. We really value your insights, of course, and John Kirby, the best that ever was. We love you. You're great. It's great to see you again.
I love you guys too.
All right, coming up next.
That was interesting. 3 to 5 years.
Patience?
Oh, listen.
That sounds like a title to one of my dad's books.
It's time we get real.